For most of my life, I have studied how countries rise, how they become successful, and how they eventually face periods of decline. I have spent decades looking at history, analyzing economic cycles, debt cycles, political shifts, and the patterns that repeat themselves across generations. What I have learned is that the biggest dangers rarely come from the events that dominate headlines. They come from underlying forces that build quietly beneath the surface until they become impossible to ignore. Today, when I look at America, I see several of those forces building at the same time. That is why I believe this may be the most important warning I have ever shared. Many people think that because America has been strong for so long, it will always remain strong. They assume that the world's largest economy, the world's most powerful military, and the issuer of the world's reserve currency cannot face the kinds of problems that have affected great powers throughout history. But history teaches us something very different. No empire, no economy, and no financial system is immune to the laws of cause and effect. Every great power eventually faces challenges created by its own success. The question is never whether those challenges will appear. The question is whether leaders and citizens recognize them early enough to respond. The first issue that concerns me is debt. Debt itself is not bad. In fact, debt can be incredibly useful when it is used productively. It allows businesses to expand, families to invest in homes, and governments to build infrastructure that creates future growth. The problem begins when debt grows faster than income for an extended period of time. At first, the effects are almost invisible. Borrowing creates spending, spending creates growth, and asset prices rise. People feel wealthier. Governments collect more tax revenue. Investors become optimistic. Everything appears to be working, but eventually the debt burden becomes so large that more borrowing produces less growth. At that point, the cycle begins to change. America is now carrying debt levels that would have been difficult to imagine decades ago. Every year, larger portions of government revenue are being used simply to pay interest on existing debt. Think about that for a moment. Money that could be used for investment, education, infrastructure, or innovation is increasingly being redirected towards servicing past obligations. This is not a short-term problem. It is a structural problem, and structural problems do not disappear because markets are having a good year. The second issue is the growing gap between wealth and opportunity. Throughout history, periods of prosperity often create significant wealth, but when that wealth becomes concentrated in the hands of a relatively small percentage of the population, tensions begin to emerge. People experience the economy differently. Some see rising asset values, while others struggle with rising living costs. Some benefit from globalization and technological change, while others feel left behind. Over time, these differences create frustration. That frustration eventually finds expression in politics, social movements, and public debate. When I study history, I notice that internal conflict often becomes more dangerous than external threats. Nations are strongest when they can work through disagreements while maintaining shared goals and institutions. They become vulnerable when divisions grow so large that compromise becomes impossible. Today, political polarization in America has reached levels that concern many observers. People increasingly view those who disagree with them not as opponents, but as enemies. That shift may seem cultural, but it has profound economic consequences. It makes it more difficult to solve long-term problems, pass meaningful reforms, and make difficult decisions. Another issue that deserves attention is the changing global order. For decades, the United States occupied a position of extraordinary dominance. It led in finance, technology, military capability, and international influence. But history shows that no nation maintains absolute dominance forever. Other countries develop, innovate, and compete. New economic powers emerge. Trade relationships evolve. Technological leadership shifts. These changes are normal, They have happened many times before. The rise of China is one example of this broader trend. Whether people view China positively or negatively is not the point. The important point is that global competition is intensifying. The world is becoming more multipolar. Economic influence is being distributed across multiple regions rather than concentrated in one dominant power. That creates opportunities, but it also creates challenges. Competition for resources, technology, capital, and influence becomes more intense. Countries must adapt to a world that looks different from the one they became accustomed to. At the same time, technological change is accelerating at an extraordinary pace. Artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, and advanced computing are transforming industries faster than many people realize. While these technologies can create tremendous productivity gains, they can also disrupt labor markets. Entire categories of work may change dramatically over the next decade. Some jobs will disappear. New jobs will emerge. The challenge is that transitions are rarely smooth. Workers, businesses, and governments often struggle to adapt quickly enough. History teaches us that technological revolutions create both winners and losers. The benefits can be enormous, but only if societies manage the transition effectively. If large segments of the population feel excluded from the benefits of technological progress, social tensions can increase, economic inequality can widen, political instability can follow. These risks should not be ignored simply because innovation is exciting. Perhaps the most important lesson I have learned is that major changes rarely happen in a straight line. People often expect crises to arrive suddenly and dramatically. In reality, most crises begin as slow-moving trends. Debt rises gradually, divisions deepen gradually, competitors gain strength gradually, confidence erodes gradually. Then one day, what seemed gradual suddenly appears obvious. People look back and wonder why they failed to recognize the warning signs. That is why my message is not one of panic. Panic is rarely useful. Fear alone does not solve problems. My message is about understanding reality clearly. The countries that navigate difficult periods successfully are usually the ones that confront challenges honestly rather than pretending they do not exist. They focus on productivity, education, innovation, and long-term thinking. They make difficult decisions before circumstances force those decisions upon them. America still possesses extraordinary strength. It has remarkable entrepreneurs, world-class universities, deep capital markets, innovative companies, valuable natural resources, and a long tradition of reinvention. Those strengths should never be underestimated, but strengths do not eliminate risks. In fact, one of the greatest dangers for successful societies is becoming complacent because of past success. When I look ahead, I do not see destiny. I see choices. The future is not predetermined. The direction America takes will depend on the decisions made by policymakers, business leaders, investors, and citizens. The challenges are real, but so are the opportunities. History is filled with examples of countries that adapted successfully when faced with major transitions. It is also filled with examples of countries that ignored warning signs until it was too late. The reason I am sharing this warning is simple. The biggest mistakes often occur when people assume that the future will look exactly like the recent past. The world is changing. Economic conditions are changing. Geopolitical relationships are changing. Technology is changing. And the systems that have defined the last several decades are being tested in ways many people do not fully appreciate. The question is not whether change is coming. Change is always coming. The question is whether we recognize it early enough to prepare. That, more than anything else, will determine what the next decade looks like for America. And that is why I believe this may be the biggest warning yet.